all of the cultural centers on Purdue's campus. It is very important. It's just a rich source of not just education, but interactions. So many of the connections that I've made here at Purdue are because of the cultural centers. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out the fact that Pam is an American Studies alum. So it's always good to be in company of American Studies family. And I just want to, before I go on, I just wanted to just recognize you for all the work that you've been doing on and off this campus, recognized and unrecognized. So I'm just very grateful to be in the space with you all today. Um, so without further ado, I'm going to get to sharing my screen here. And we're talking about pushing the academic boundaries as a mixed medium EntreScholar. Now, that's a mouthful, but that's kind of how I describe myself. I see myself as a person that is entrepreneurial and also happens to be a scholar. I believe that before the food truck scholar even came to be, I've always been entrepreneurial. It has nothing to do with the fact that I have a business degree in undergrad, which I do have, but it didn't necessarily teach entrepreneurship. That's something that I've just always had. I remember when I was little, my auntie, she bought me so many things. She bought me everything I ever wanted. I love her for it. But one of the things that I remember as a child is that I had a chalkboard, I had a cash register, and I had all the cooking essentials known to man. So it should be no surprise now that I am an instructor of African American Studies and American Studies. I study food trucks and I run a business. It was ingrained at me from the time I was 4. So here we are. So who am I beyond all of that? Like everything that Pam said was just absolutely wonderful and beautiful, and I'm very humbled by it. But if you could reduce me to 3 things, and if anyone has any questions, by all means, you can shout out. I'm okay with that. I'm a lover of knowledge in all its forms. I love learning through books, yes, but I really mainly learn through videos and conversations with people. That's really where I do my best. Listening is a skill that I'm always trying to sharpen. I feel like so many times we can be running, trying to do the next thing that people say some amazing things. And if we just, be a little bit more still, we can learn so much more than any classroom could ever teach. I'm a foodie. So I explore cities in a different way. I know some people may like to go to the museum, they might like to find the tourist attractions. That's not me. I'm the person that loves to explore all the cities by food. So tacos, fries, and wings are my love language. Valentine's Day has passed, but if you want to show me that you care, you can still, drop off some of that for me. I would really appreciate it. And then finally, I'm a roaming creative. I love to make things. Some of my fondest memories as a child was that my aunt was the first person in our family to go to college, my great aunt more specifically. And she majored in early childhood education and she had a minor in arts and crafts. And so some of my fondest memories of her is that she would always spend Saturdays getting arts and craft books and learning how to do things. And so I would try to pick up behind her, or maybe I was trying to make something and she saw my creativity and then she wanted to learn how to do it. We made candles, we did dolls, we did a lot of different things together. So I've always been creative. But somehow when I got to college and when I got into school, I started thinking, well, maybe I'm not really creative because I couldn't draw like one person, or I couldn't do graphic design like someone else, or, I didn't necessarily have the type of fashion that was in at that point in time. But we are all creative. And so that is what I really want to drive home first and foremost of the topic today, is that there's going to be a lot of people in this room perhaps that may be thinking, well, I'm not entrepreneurial, or I'm not creative like her. You don't have to be creative like me. You just need to be creative like you. So how did I get here? I get that all the time. Like, how did I become the food truck scholar? And I think that's a longer story for what we have time for today. But I will say that at the core of what the food truck scholar is, it is about me being able to bring not just the work that I do from the academia into public spaces, but it really is, if I be honest, an opportunity for me to bring all of me into the academy, and then all of me into public space, and to make them tangible and to make them realistic and easy to grasp, because I was a person that became very frustrated in school. So I've always been someone that, I guess you would call an overachiever. I guess you would call someone that was the straight A student. I was that, absolutely. But when I got to college around my sophomore year, I think that was an awakening moment for me. I came to UAB as a business major. I was like, I'm going to be like Ursula Burns. And fun Black history fact, Ursula Burns is the first Black woman to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She stepped down a few years ago from her post as CEO of Xerox. And I looked up to her. I looked up to Oprah. I was like, I'm going to, become a business major and do all of this. And I'm going to be like them. And I get into my business degree and I did not like it. I was an HR major. I did not like it. I can say it now because they can't take the degree from me. I slept in most of my classes. I struggled to stay awake. It was rough. But part of the reason why it was very rough for me was because I couldn't see how to make it tangible to my everyday. And I'm the person that I really need to know, how can I take this thing that I'm learning in the classroom and go home right now and apply it? How can I explain to my great grandmother what this means? How can I explain to my mom what this means? And if I can't do that, then I really kind of tune out. Well, I had a moment my sophomore year. I was appointed the student program director of the Birmingham Business Project. It was 2013. We were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement, and they asked the business school to analyze Birmingham's economic, social, racial, and educational development 50 years from 1963, and to make projections as to what we would see become the rising industries and where do we think as a city Birmingham was going to be. And so, for those who are unfamiliar with Birmingham, Alabama, in many regards, we are, believed to be the birthplace of the civil rights movement. It is where, even though the Montgomery bus boycott was not there, even though Selma was not there, you did have the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. You did have the Children's March. There were a lot of things within the civil rights movement that Birmingham is pivotal for. And so I was in charge of that. I was 20 years old at the time. I had to lead high school students on issues of race. I designed the curriculum. I led the field trips. I scheduled when they were going to be. I was the person that was in charge of, writing to the first Black mayor of Birmingham and the current mayor at the time to get them in the room so that we could ask questions. Um, it was an intense 2 weeks of hands-on research, going to Green Acres, which was a restaurant and is still standing, that was in existence in the 1960s, that was critical in the 1960s as a gathering place, and is still historical in Birmingham to this day. We had people from all different walks of life that knew what it was like to be working in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, that led some of these marches, that were arrested. We had all these people in the room, and they're talking about where Birmingham was, not just racially, but also economically. We learned about the trends. We learned about where Birmingham in the 90s was a huge financial center, right? And still to this day, Regions Bank is headquartered there. I became very excited. I loved it. But when the program was over, if I be very honest, there was a moment of a mental breakdown. And you're like, why? Well, it was because after that summer, I go into my junior year with my courses, and I realized that none of those courses were anywhere near what I experienced that summer. That summer, business became alive to me. That summer, I got a chance to meet people. I got a chance to teach and mentor and educate and learn and be challenged and learn about business in a way I never learned about it before. I got a chance to see Birmingham through a lens I had never seen before. I grew up there my whole life, and I felt as if I was just discovering the city all over again. And it was an awakening moment. And then I had to go back to my classes that put me to sleep. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. So I wasn't going to go to grad school before that, but I pushed myself to like, now is the time to find something else. Because if this isn't it, something has to be it. So I took a gap year. I actually remained at UAB, but in a different capacity. I served as an AmeriCorps Vista for the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. And it was there that I learned what service learning was. So technically the project I did that summer was considered to be a service learning course. And so I spent a year after graduation and a year after I had studied abroad, working with professors that were building service learning courses. And if they needed to do field trips or whatnot, I was part of the team that went with them to help execute what those tasks were. And then right after that, I went to Vanderbilt. I got a master's degree in education in learning diversity and urban studies. And some of the most critical parts of that program was the seminar courses that I had with my advisor, where everything was a teaching moment. Yes, we did academic articles. Yes, we did the books. Yes, we did all of that. But what made that program stand out was that she also leveraged our lived experiences just as much as she leveraged the text, just as much as she leveraged academic scholars. And for the first time outside of that program that I did at UAB, I felt as if the lived experience had a space in the classroom. And then I learned more about critical race theory, which basically says, hey, lived experiences count as knowledge. And then my capstone was all about how do you take what you've learned in the classroom and you make it applicable into the everyday. So if I had to look at 3 moments of time that have helped shape how I think and how I move, it would definitely be those moments. And I feel like it's important for you to understand that to get a little glimpse of like how I move and how I work. So now that you understand that, how do I define an EntreScholar? What is that? Yeah, it's a term that I kind of came up with, but what does it really mean? Essentially, I'm a creative that seeks to present passions and interests into multiple mediums of content to be consumed by public and academic scholars. I believe everybody is a scholar. It's just whether or not they're in the academy or not. And so I believe that I can take this passion that I have about learning about food and the people that make it, and it just so happens to be on a food truck. And I can present that content to you in multiple different ways. And how do I do that? I do that by going to academic conferences. So I'm in American Studies. Our major conference, if you will, is the ASA. So you're going to see me at the ASA. I'm going to present my research there. But I'm also going to be at some conferences that I would consider a hybrid course. For example, the Black Communities Conference. That is where academics and creatives and filmmakers and therapists and mayors and librarians and stakeholders of townships, they're all there because we're all talking about the Black experience. So you're going to see me at those conferences. You're going to see me podcasting. You're going to see me doing photography and sharing the photography, and maybe it's a photo and a story, like photo essays. You may see that. You may see me write a magazine article. So I've written for Cuisine Noir magazine. It's the largest magazine dedicated to Black food, wine, and travel. And it's also the first one to be dedicated solely to that. I wrote Black Food Trucks as Agents of Change. I also went on to write another article for them as well. You may also see me do some other things that I can't talk about just yet, but I can say that a book is underway. So, however, I want to create or communicate what I'm talking about to different audiences, that's what I'll do. I understand that some people, they love when I'm talking about all the academic jargon and citing this person and citing that person. Some people want to see me blend hip hop and food trucks together, and I totally can. And yes, they definitely fit. Other people, when they're a food truck owner, they just want me to tell them about what the trends that I'm seeing across the country. And still some want to listen to the stories through the podcast. I'm able to take the same information, but just present it differently. But the takeaway here today is not for you to say, oh, I got to make it look like Ariel. Absolutely not. Again, the definition is a creative that seeks to present passions and interests into multiple mediums of content. So, how do you express yourself creatively? And I'm going to go ahead and take the next moment to just say this is that I don't want to put this all on me. I'm actually going to show you some colleagues of mine, those who are close to me, those who are distant, those that I know and love from afar in different capacities, that I would consider them to be an Entre scholar. So the first one that I have to mention is my girl, Elise Smith. She's at IU. She's a PhD candidate in education there. Her brand started a little bit before mine. I want to say either 2016 or 2017. I started my research in 2017. I started my brand in 2018. We've known each other since early 2018. And she is the owner of Fatness Fiction, the brand, as well as Plus Size Magic Radio, the podcast, and the magazine, as well as a clothing line, photography. She's done magazine writing. She's actually launched her own magazine. She's done a documentary. She's also done photo shoots. She done scholarships. She just does amazing work. And I could not provide you this definition and not talk about her. Um, she's been doing this for a very long time. Me and her have, of course, met up. We talk. I draw inspiration from her. Um, this is one example. This is how she does it. I'm not looking to do a clothing line. That's totally within her, skill set, within her interest, and it fits her overall mission to share the stories of those who are defined as fat, fluffy, plus, thick, voluptuous. Like that fits for her. So again, it is about how do you express yourself? But we don't even have to go to IU. You don't even have to look at me. There are other people from Purdue and elsewhere that I would consider to be an Entre scholar. And I'm going to share some of them here. So Anita Lucchesi, she's a PhD candidate at the University of Arizona. She is the executive director of the Sovereign Bodies Institute. Okay, so her research has been dealing with missing Indigenous women, those who have been sexually assaulted, those who have gone missing, like the government is not checking for them, local enforcement has stopped looking for them. Her work takes that on. As someone who had been kidnapped, as someone who had been assaulted herself, she has made that her life's mission and work. So beyond her dissertation, she has created this nonprofit, and I have had the privilege to, watch her create that. But not only that, she's written legislative pieces. She's done a lot of activist work around this topic and cause. You have now Dr. Tanisha Watkins, a PhD graduate of 2019. She's the founder of PhDology, the unscientific study of doctoral students. One of my friends, now Dr. Tori Crops, when I officially passed my prospectus, she gifted me with a shirt that says currently dissertating, that was made by Tanisha Watkins. And so she has a blog, but she also has the clothing line, the t-shirt line that really breaks down different experiences of the doctoral journey. We also have Chanel Beebe, who is a PhD candidate here at Purdue in engineering education. And Chanel, I love Chanel. She really expresses herself in multiple forms. And I draw inspiration from her as a person that doesn't say, I have to pick one thing. She really does embody each and every part of how she chooses to expresses herself creatively. For example, she has BB Arts, which is all of her artwork. So maybe, I want to say a year and a half ago, before Corona and everything changed our worlds, she actually had her art on display at the Lafayette Arts Federation downtown. She also has BB Speaks. She does poetry. She was a part of the Haraka Writers at the Black Cultural Center. She was also scholar in residence at the Black Cultural Center, and I had the honor to take over after her. She's currently on fellowship. And then she also has Bitten Magazine, which is now in its third iteration. So definitely, if you want to buy that and support her, absolutely support each and every one of the women I have shown you here. Both of them represent Black and Indigenous scholars that I absolutely support and I look up to. But maybe you're sitting here and you're saying, well, Ariel, I've already gotten my PhD. I didn't do anything with my dissertation. In fact, I'm doing something totally different, or, I just wasn't thinking that during my PhD journey, or maybe just simply, I got a year left. I'm trying to get out of here. I'm not trying to add more work on me as a doctoral student. I feel that. I'm not mad at it. I salute you. But I want you to know it's not too late. You don't have to start this as a PhD student. You can graduate and use your research and launch something afterwards, and it'll be just as meaningful. Or you could be a professor and do it as well. So, in honor of Black History Month, I would be remiss if I didn't select my friend, my colleague, Dr. Tori Crops. Dr. Tori Crops is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Rice University. And I have to let y'all know, she was the second African-American woman to earn her PhD. I'm going to butcher the acronym, but I believe it's Agriculture, Education, and Communications here at Purdue University. And her research is the first, there is no other, the first to examine Black women in agriculture. So we're talking about the lack of representation of people of color in STEM, and more specifically Black women. We really have to have a conversation on agriculture, and that often is left out. So being that her dissertation work has been on that, she has taken it a step further to start Ag and Color to recognize Black women in agriculture. I really encourage you to go to the website agandcolor.com, as well as follow her on Instagram. Throughout Black History Month, she has been recognizing Black women in ag all Black History Month long. So definitely check out her work as well. And I'm so excited to see all of the work that she's doing. So you can have people that may have been in the game 2 or 3 years, or maybe you just started this within the past year. Either way, there is still room for you to do it. And for those who truly have a heart for it, we invite you to do that. Now, here's some questions you should probably ask yourself if you're looking at this like, I really like this area. This is fascinating. So let's think about some things. Number one, you need to figure out who is your audience. Identify who you are serving. Are you looking to serve the academy? Is this another way to, impress your colleagues? Or you want to talk to the people or to the place or to the group that you did your research with? Be very clear and honest about who you are being in conversation with. I knew that my whole goal is to really not necessarily be in conversation with other street food scholars. I'm going to literally have interviews with them. But when we're doing those interviews, it's not for the academy. It's for the food truck owner that's listening to my show. It's for maybe someone that just loves food and they want to hear what are two mobile food scholars having to say about this topic. So that impacts like how we talk. It impacts the words that we use. So sometimes if you're listening on my show, if someone gives jargon that's specific to a field, whether it's the academy or restaurants, you might hear me say, explain, what does that mean? Because I'm having in my head that maybe my target audience, they may not have that knowledge. And I'm asking you to break it down for them. Second, you need to think about what is the need of your audience. Don't just do your research and put it out there and be like, here, take this, draw from it what you can. No, you really need to be proactive in making sure that their needs are forefront in this. What is the point of being an EntreScholar if you're not fitting a need? The core part of entrepreneurship is that you find a need and fill it. So identify who is your audience, then figure out what their needs are, and then ask yourself, how can your research work to address those questions? Third, what mediums do they use? So if I was teaching an entrepreneurship course, and I do teach one for African American Studies this fall, we're going to talk about customer channels. So once you identify who your customer is, how do they want you to meet that need? In what capacity? So maybe they want to do it in a podcast. Maybe they want you to do a conference. Maybe they want you to do a room in Clubhouse. Maybe they want you to do a children's book. It could be so many different things. Figure out what mediums does your audience use, and which of those are you willing to learn and sharpen your skills in. Some of them are not going to be things that you already know how to do. I did not know how to podcast before I started podcasting. I had no idea. I had to sit down and take time to learn, and I'm always learning how to perfect my craft and get better. Are you committed to doing this, even if it may not or won't go into all of your dissertation or your tenure dossier? Again, that goes back to who is your audience and who are you doing it for? I've been doing the Food Truck Scholar now for 3 years. And when I first got started, nobody was paying me. I was able to use some funding from Purdue because it's also my research. But there wasn't a company that was paying me. No food trucks were paying me. Of course not. I would work 6 days a week at Purdue and then literally drive to all these other food truck festivals after that. And I was tired. I was tired, but I wanted to be committed to the people that I said I was doing this for. I wanted them to see me interacting with them. I wanted them to see me at the food truck. I wanted them to see me patronize them. I wanted them to know that beyond the research, I am here. Can you make it sustainable? Will it be accessible even after you choose to move on to something else? So I get this question a lot, is that, will I continue doing a Food Truck Scholar after I graduate? Yes, that is something I love to do. But even afterwards, we have to have conversations about if I, for whatever reason, choose to pivot from the Food Truck Scholar podcast to, I don't know, maybe pound cakes. I like to bake pound cakes. So maybe I might pivot from here to there. What happens to all the audio? We looking at ways to back it up and to keep it on the website. Just because I may not be doing it, it still has to be accessible, because that was the whole purpose of the mission in the first place. So always think about not just the moment, but how do you plan to keep this sustainable, even after you choose to pivot or whatever the case may be. Another way that I challenge the Academy is through different terms that we have been trained to chase after. One of them being impact factor. So for those who publish, y'all know that it's not just getting into a journal. You have to know what's the impact factor of that journal. How many people are reading it? How many people are likely to read my article and to cite it? And I'll publish, but I don't really care that much about that, if I be honest. I care about my audience, and my audience is not in the Academy. So this is my impact factor, or part of it rather. Since we've launched in 2019, I have had over 25,000 downloads. We represent ourselves in 70 countries worldwide, and that's across 6 continents. So far, it's just, the people of Happy Feet, Antarctica, and all these penguins have not listened to the Food Truck Scholar podcast, but one day we might find something for Mumble to listen to as well. But for now, we are very happy that we are in those 6 continents worldwide. So what are some things that we should be doing right now? You say, okay, yes, I'm in it. I want to do this. What would be my top 4 or 5 tips for you to keep in mind? Number 1, center their voices. I say there as people because I'm a person that's interviewing people. For you, it may be a place, it may be a topic, whatever the situation is, keep that forefront. Keep that forefront at all costs. What makes me very happy about my podcast is when people that I've had on my show, they get the impact and that you get to hear them. When you come on my podcast, it's probably going to be about 3 or 4 times a season where it's just me on the mic in the beginning, in the end, and maybe in the middle. But for everything else, I'm sitting down with people, because it's not about how much Ariel knows. It's really about the people that are on my show. To provide tangible value. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So when COVID hit last year, I teamed up with an app that helps you find Black-owned restaurants and food trucks, Eat Okra. And we put together a 3-part webinar entitled Black Food Entrepreneurship. So this was the first iteration of it. We talked about marketing strategies. We talked about menu creation and online development. We talked about your first year of food trucking, because more and more people were going into food trucks. All of a sudden, people who didn't have online systems now need an online system. So I chose to respond to that and say, hey, let's get in front of it. And so we was able to find people in this field that this is their passion and this is their expertise. And we had them on and we did it for free. We did it for free. We did it on a Zoom call. We sent it out to everyone. We let people ask and answer questions. We recorded it and we put it on YouTube because we wanted people to have access to that. From there, every week at 3 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays, I hold a room in Clubhouse to talk about the food truck industry. And I've been able to meet people that probably had not have heard of me or the podcast, but we're still able to create value. We've now created an actual club within Clubhouse, and now it has almost 2,000 people that's either a member of it or follow. And we have some of these conversations. For example, how are food trucks planning to navigate 2021 now that we have more and more food trucks a part of the industry? For some, it has been, a really great year. For some, it's been really bad. And I brought on food truckers to talk about that. So not just me, I'm serving more as a moderator in this case, but I'm inviting food truckers to say, hey, how is this like for you? And they are able to get so much value out of that. Number 3, you want to foster stakeholdership. Yes, I'm the host of the Food Truck Scholar, but I am nothing without the people that are on the show. So how do you create an environment where they feel as if they are contributing to it, and not only just feel, but they really are adding value? So I'm not going to read all of it, but this comes from Diana Beasley. She runs Miss Beasley Catering in Louisiana. It's the only food truck that provides raw fruits and vegetables as well as education to the Black community. She was also on Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres actually gave her her food truck. And one of the things that she said in my interview, she said, when I saw you was putting this together regarding educational empowerment, that meant to me jump on board and give whatever information I can to help you to be able to create a very good information to deliver to people. Everybody's going to get it and they'll understand what this Food Truck Scholar purpose is about. Not just because you're completing the next phase of an education, but you're bringing the scientific information, which is so valid because we can document where all of this came from and how we can make it and be better. That's what you're doing. And so every food trucker, I'm centering their knowledge. I said I'm a lover of all things related to knowledge. They're able to bring their lived experiences on the show and say, hey, in Louisiana, this is what's happening. Based upon my experiences, this is how I had to navigate this. And so it becomes so much richer beyond just my observations, beyond my scholastic research in libraries. They have their lived experiences they're able to, that they draw from and then bring to this platform. Number 4, you want to be held accountable by your stakeholders. So once you get stakeholders, you want to make sure that they are able to hold you accountable. Don't just have them there because it sounds cute. Really listen to them. So I included this screenshot here because, I said I did that Clubhouse room. And at first I had it kind of like moderators that were on like every week because I thought that was going to be the most helpful way to do it. But there were some food truckers, and this no shade or bad thing, but many of them came from a formal culinary education, or they may have had some different experiences that may not reflect the general public. And so one of my food truckers that were on the podcast and they was in the room as a moderator, they inboxed me one day and said, hey, can I call you? So they called me and they said, listen, we love what you're doing. We love you, but the room as it's going is not relatable to the most people. Like most people, they start cooking out their house. Like they don't have these type of experiences. So we think you should go back to how you do your podcast. You do your podcast one-on-one. Maybe you should do that here with Clubhouse. And so I took that feedback and I made some changes to how I run Clubhouse. So now we're doing one-on-one conversations, very similar to how I would do my podcast. We just reserved the last 20 to 15 minutes for Q&A. And that has gone over pretty well. And so this is actually a screenshot of part of that conversation where he's like, I love the direction it's going in now. And I was like, I appreciate you for your feedback. You have to be open for that. So I have to hold myself accountable. If someone that's been rocking with me this long say, hey, Ariel, we love you, but like, I feel like some of the authenticity isn't there coming from some of these people. Like they're not, they're not being raw. And that's why people love you, is because people are being honest and raw. And I feel like we're getting, X, Y, and Z. That's important. that's critical to have. So I always make sure that I am holding myself accountable. Um, I know I've said a whole lot, but I do want to have some time for questions if there are any. I just want to say, let's connect. So if you have questions beyond this, if you want to check out the Clubhouse room, here is how you follow me on all social media platforms. And even though it isn't up here, I got to put on my podcast voice and say, make sure you subscribe to the Food Truck Scholar podcast, available now on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you listen to your other favorite podcast. March 1st begins the season 3 of the Food Truck Scholar podcast, and I would love you to be a part of it. But for now, thank you all so much, and I'm going to open it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for speaking. It's wonderful. And I would like to open opportunity for all of you to ask questions. You can unmute. You can write on the chat. If you would like to remain anonymous, you can also send it to me. So, yes.
I have a question. So when it comes to blending these different passions of yours, because I guess I'm in a similar situation with what I'm trying to do. And so how do you reach those different demographics, like the people who are purely in these different passion areas, but also how do you explain to people how you blend them?
That's a good question. Thanks, Kay. Um, so when it comes down to the explanation part, I think that's the part I asked first, is that I didn't necessarily explain for the, and the reason why I say that is because in some situations it kind of feels like you're on the defensive, as if I have to justify that each part of them are valued. I know that they are, and so what I did was I came in and I asserted it first, and said, hey, these are the ways that I'm explaining myself, and I do it this way. So instead of like waiting for someone to ask, I just come out and say, here's how. In terms of like how I selected the different methods, well, I first started on YouTube. That's one thing that I did. I realized the YouTube model at that point in time was not sustainable for me. It was not sustainable because I could not get the content consistently. I was having people ask, hey, when the next video coming out? And your girl didn't have any money to do any travel. So I had to realize, how do I, uphold what the food truck owners are looking for, which is more content, and do it in a consistent manner. So we turned to Instagram Live, and then eventually we went to podcasting. When it comes down to conferences, I mainly go to those conferences because I know that's what my doctoral program is looking for. They're looking for like my academic engagement. So that's part of it. The second thing is that I go to conferences like the Black Communities Conference, that I would consider a hybrid conference, because that's where I personally get fed. It's no shade to the ASA, but sometimes it still has its own academic jargon that I don't always want to navigate. But the Black Communities Conference is a space where I feel like is at home. And one of the advice I did get from a professor at Vanderbilt is that when you go to conferences as an academic, you're going to have different levels. You're going to have the conferences that you go to because that's where you're supposed to go for sake of your professional career. But then you're also going to have those smaller, more intimate spaces where you feel at home. And so I choose to go there. In terms of the photographs, I started taking pictures because I wanted to document the experiences. And then food truckers started asking me, hey, can you post me here? Or can you talk about this? Can you talk about that? And so I realized, okay, this is an opportunity for me to tell stories just through the photographs. And so through that, it became, the posting on the Instagram, it became the magazine articles as well. So for me, that's how it came out. I didn't wait for anyone to ask me like why you do it this way. I just said, hey, I talked to this group and this is how they see me. And sometimes people just tell you, like I'm interviewing people and they're like, we need you to do this and you need to do this and do this. And I do weigh those considerations, of course. But when I'm seeing a similar thread throughout all of them, I get, okay, this is the message that's important. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I'm happy to talk to you more later on if it doesn't.
Yes, it did, but also, yeah, let's talk later.
Okay, sounds good. Any other questions?
Ariel, we had a question coming in.
Okay.
I think it relates also to the beginning of the event where we chatted a little bit. What kind of support did you get from Purdue communities? Um, and can you navigate that and let us know how you got support from Purdue communities for us, please?
Oh yeah, sure. So the one thing that I will say as a doctoral student is that I'm very blessed to have the department that I have and the committee that I have, because all of us who got PhDs or working to get PhDs know your committee can make or break your experience for so many reasons. So I'm grateful that I had people like Dr. Rayvon Fouché, Dr. Stephanie Master, Shannon McMullen, that have been supportive of my work. They may not always understood everything that I was going to do, but they were supportive of it. So that was helpful. They helped me see ways that it didn't have to be completely separate from my dissertation. And so because of that, for the College of Liberal Arts, I could apply for a Promise grant or for some type of travel funding that may have been $400. So how do we do that? I would go to my academic conferences, but I would also say, hey, I'm going to these food trucks. So I remember in 2018, I went to a conference that was in Riverside, California. There are no food trucks in that area though. So I went and got a rental car and I would drive an hour and 22 minutes one way just to get to LA so I could see the food trucks there. So I made it part of my research. Sometimes it would have to be a little bit out my way and a little bit inconvenient, but that's what I did. Now, I would also say this too, is that even though we have a center for entrepreneurship on this campus, there still needs to be more conversation about representation of entrepreneurship, because we focus so much on startups and engineering, when in actuality, that's the minority of entrepreneurs in the United States. Most of your entrepreneurs are coming from the arts. They're the theater, they're dance, their food, their hair, and we're not seeing that. And it's not a slight to our campus. This is a conversation about entrepreneurship across the country in higher ed, about how it's not being as reflective of who entrepreneurs really are. So in that case, I really relied on many sister scholars. So a lot of people that you saw on that screen, these are people that I've had conversations with about, yeah, I need to be writing my, or studying for my prelims, but I also need to be, I'm also painting, or I'm doing this magazine, or whatever the case may be. And so we had to rely on those friendships and those networks, because sometimes it can be a little lonely, or it can be a little isolating, because not everyone understands, why we are basically creating more work for ourselves. But it is. I had a professor that said, you should wait till you're a postdoc. And I was like, no, listen, you don't understand. Like, me doing this work is actually keeping me wanting to finish this PhD, because if not, I wouldn't have went to culinary school a long time ago. So I really have to do this thing to keep me grounded and focused on it.
Thank you. Again. If you would like to ask questions, please feel free to unmute as well.
Can I jump in? This is Lily Marsh. Hi, we haven't met. I think your advice on audience is so good, and that's sort of an area that trips me up. I'm a textile person, and my research was in textile, but I also speak to a lot of popular groups, and I often find myself kind of moving down a rabbit hole of academic language to the wrong audience. I don't get as much chance to talk about my academic research as I'd like, or the real fascinating tidbits that make it fascinating to me. So I find sometimes that that's just really difficult for me to sort of have the appropriate language to the appropriate audience. Any thoughts on that?
Pretend that you're a 4-year-old or pretend talking to a 4-year-old. So I think sometimes it's a little bit easier for me because I have a 6-year-old brother that's about to turn 7, going on 70. But I have to think about, if I were to talk to him, how would I explain it? So before my committee told me, okay, you got to break this down a little bit, my dissertation was focusing on food trucks as part of hip hop culture. Okay. And so I can talk about the food truck imaginary and all that type of stuff, but no, I say food trucks are a part of hip hop. So one thing that has helped me, and I struggled and still work on defining it even more, is take your topic, and I like writing on paper and on whiteboards all the time. And so what is the one liner about your work? If you had one line and to talk about it, how would you talk about it? And if it comes out in academic jargon, it comes out in academic jargon. But now take those words, draw an arrow or break it out and be like, now what does that mean? Okay. So like, I remember one of my friends, she likes to use the word quotidian. And I didn't know what quotidian is, and I probably forgot by now. So like, I would look it up and like, so what does that mean? And write that out. And then if you have another word in this academic term, what do you mean by that? Because part of the issue sometimes in my experience with academia is that we use these big words so much, we don't forget what they mean. So it's a good exercise to help you say, okay, so when I say this word, what is this? Okay, when I say this word, what do I mean here? And then step back and look at it and be like, oh, blah, 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 in this, in that. That has helped me. Another thing that would work is saying, okay, let's take one piece of it that isn't maybe exactly my research, but maybe it's related to it, where I could speak on it. Or maybe, when you're doing a literature review and you're building up to your actual research, maybe you could pull from that and get interest. Everybody's not going to be interested in the food trucks and the hip hop part. Some people ask me, hey, do you know of any classes of how I can become better on the business side of food trucks? Because they're here to turn the food truck scholar. That's not exactly what my work is, but my work is to support food truckers, especially those of color. So what I'm doing, I'm researching what does that mean, and I may share it with them. So those are just some things I'm thinking of right now. And then, if you do a podcast or if you do a blog, whatever the case may be, I actually spend the first episode and it's called Who is the Food Truck Scholar? And I just lay out how I came to this topic. It's not even the research just yet, just how did I come to study this in the first place? And maybe that might be beneficial to you too, is to think about how did you come to this topic? And you'll probably find people that can relate to you in that form. But I hope that answered your question.
Hi, Ariel. Thanks for your presentation today. I'm just thinking about, because I remember like when you were first getting started with the Food Truck Scholar and creating this brand, and now as you're talking about it like today, I'm wondering how your positioning of yourself as scholar to this larger public audience, like why, I guess, why did you choose to brand yourself as the Food Truck Scholar? And what did you find kind of the response to be from food truck owners and all the folks that you're talking about and networking with?
Great question. So I did that because people butcher my name too much. Like that's the real reason. People butcher my name too much. I am Ariel D. Smith, Ariel Demetria Smith. Too many people butcher my name. I become Ariel, Ariel, Ariel. If you listen to any interview that I've done recently, it's been 50 million different versions of my name. And so I can't stand to hear my name butchered. So one of the things that we do at academic conferences, when we can't remember somebody's name, we go, oh, the scholar that does X, Y, and Z. Right? Like we would do that all the time. So I was like, you know what? Don't even worry about trying to say my name. Just say the Food Truck Scholar, because you probably haven't seen that many food truck scholars anyway. So that'll work. That's how the name came about. I think they embrace the Food Truck Scholar even more than I do. I still have moments to this day where if I'm in a room and people invite me to come and talk about food trucks, to an extent, sometimes I get insecure. I still work on that to be like, do I know enough? I don't own a food truck. Do I deserve to be called that? But no, and I had to have an honest conversation with a food trucker. They said, we're not asking you to know how to run a food truck. What you do is you're able to study what's going on, and you talk to all of these people And through you, we get a chance to know what East Coast is doing, what West Coast is doing. So no, you are the food truck scholar. You have to be comfortable with that. So I feel like the community has, they embrace it with no question thus far, for the most part, more so than I actually do. That's a good question.
Yeah, yeah, Ariel. Thank you so much for inspirational stories and also like your work that you do. I'm curious about like along the way, if you find yourself feeling discouraged by what you do, or challenges along the way that makes you feel down. Like, how do you bounce back? Like, do you have community? Like, how do you do it? Do you
I
like?
go to therapy every other Thursday at 2 o'clock. So that's the one thing. So I don't have it this week, but I have it next week. I'm someone that is a perfectionist. And when I feel as if I'm not moving at the level that I want to move, or if I'm not moving
Mm,
as fast as I should, even right now with my dissertation, like that introduction that Pam gave was absolutely beautiful. But still in my head, I'm like, my committee is reading what I got of my dissertation so far, and I feel like it's 30 some odd jumble pages, and I really need to be writing this, and I really need to be writing that. Like, I do that all the time. And I talk to my therapist about this all the time. And, the first thing that I'm learning right now is that there's three things that you have to learn as a human being that nobody says explicitly. You have to be willing to learn, you have to be willing to unlearn, and you have to be willing to relearn. So I have to learn how to love myself and give myself grace. I have to learn how to celebrate myself. I have to unlearn looking for every nitpicky thing that I do wrong. And that's kind of hard to do because in seminars, a doctoral student, you pick apart a text for 3 hours, and then when it's time for you to write, they say just start, and it doesn't have to be perfect. But we spent 3 hours critiquing the work for not being perfect. So you have to unlearn that, and you have to relearn habits of giving yourself affirmation. For example, in my mirror right now, this is something I just started literally 3 days ago. I have a piece of paper that's taped on my mirror, and it has three prompts. It says, Ariel, I'm proud of you for. And I have to say my name, and I have to list 7 things I'm proud of myself for. The second thing, it says, Ariel, I forgive you for. And I list 7 things I forgive myself for. And if it's the same thing for 30 days, then clearly it's still in my spirit and I haven't left it yet and I haven't released it. So I have to say it. And then the third thing is, Ariel, I commit to you that. And I commit to myself to do, whether it's, I commit to find something that you like about yourself. I commit that when you stand in front of the mirror, you don't pick yourself apart. You praise something that you do right. I commit to celebrate any step I take towards my dissertation, even if it's just 2 sentences. Like, those are the things that I'm working on right now, to really help me change my mindset. Because ultimately for me, I think it's a mindset thing, is that we'll look at all the things that we don't do and instead of the things that we do right.
love that self-compassion approach.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Ariel, one more question to close our event together right now. I think you really brought up the importance of and the possibilities of how lived experience, right, can exist and has space in academic classroom, in academic research, in our engagement in activism. So what encouragement can you give us for those of us who are still seeking to include that part of us or our lived experience into the things that we do?
I hate to be the cheesy person and say just do it, but it is that, and it means being intentional with your syllabus. So I said I'm teaching African American studies. I'm teaching an entrepreneurship course called Securing the Bag, and each week for 8 weeks we're talking about a different field of entrepreneurship. And hey, I may not be a hairstylist, but I'm bringing on someone who is. So one thing is, yes, embracing your lived experiences, but also the lived experiences of people around you within that topic. It's also embracing the lived experiences of your students. There's probably going to be a topic that's come up and say, hey, what's your relationship to it? The very first assignment, when I build a course, now when I'm teaching someone else's course, it's different. But when I'm building a course, the very first assignment is actually a 2-page reflection. And it says, how do you define whatever the topic of that course is? how do you define it? And I have supporting questions underneath that. Then I'll say, why do you think we should study this topic? What's your relationship to it? And so I come out of that realizing, oh, some of them own a business. Some of them got family or friends that own a business. And so I'm letting them know from the onset, like, what's your lived experience? When we do different reflections and whatnot, I'm asking them, if you have a lived experience with this, draw from it. If you don't, pose some questions, not always answer. Sometimes questions matter too. So those are just some ways that I have been working through it. I don't pretend to know all of it, but this is where I'm at this point in time and how I'm choosing to address that.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for joining us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If you have not listened to the Food Truck Scholar, then you know where to find Ariel. And thank you again. We have a survey that if you have time to fill out, it's on the chat. But again, thank you so much for being here, and see you again on the next Lunch and Learn next Thursday. Until then, take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You would like to stay and chat a little bit, feel free to, or introduce yourself, feel free to do so. I'll be here for about 5 more minutes.
Okay, cool. I think I'm running out of water. Are we still recording or?
Oh, I need to.